Okay, Rabosai. So we have in these sugis that we've been learning on Lamites, Mem, Mem Aleph, have the mitzvahs of Hakhel and Krias. And what I'd like to focus our attention on today is the relationship between Hakhel and Krias. Now, if we have a Gemara Megillah, I could try the Chalim. Yeah. All right. All right. Yeah. On that, you on the page. Take a look at that Gemara. As just as like a little bit of an introduction. Can I borrow it just for a minute? I'll give you my time. I don't need to steal it. Gemara says the following here in Megillah on the pasuk Vayolen Yoshua. This is on Daf Gimel and Aleph in Megillah. Vayolen Yoshua Balayla Hu B'Tocha Emek Omad Yochanan Malami Shalad B'Omka Shel Halach B'Yomer of Shmuel Bar Onya Gadol Talmud Torah Yoser. So there's an issue here as to what is greater, Talmud Torah or Hakrovas Karbonos, in this case Tmida. And there seems to be an apparent contradiction in this issue, and the Gemara resolves it by saying, Ha de Rabin v'ha de Yochel. And the Gemara seems to assume here, you'll take a look when you get a chance, just as an introduction to today's discussion, that there's something called Talmud Torah de Rabin, and it has a special category, its own status, to the extent to which it could override even karbanos. So let's say, for example, you had a case of a Kohen who was on his way to do the avodah, but there was Talmud Torah de Rabin. Should he postpone the avodah for the sake of Talmud Torah de Rabin? So I heard once from my Rebbe many years ago that what is the source in the Torah for this concept called Talmud Torah de Rabin? That's a separate kiyum, and it has the power to override karbanos, the avodah. And he said it was the mitzvah of Hakhel.
Now we Rashi says here to have some Kol Yisrael Hakhel.
Kol Yisrael. Kol Yisrael is a reference to Hakhel because it says Anoshim Noshim V'Tach.
Kol Yisrael.
So again, if you have a Chumash Dvarim, or if you have page Nun Vav in the pages that should be in your phone, not these pages, okay? You don't have your phone?
I forgot it. It's fine. I'll listen.
So let's see. I would give you my phone.
No.
I'm listening. Get internet if I have my phone.
I'm listening.
All right. Anyway, the Torah in Dvarim Lamed Aleph in Parshas Vayelech Vayitzav Moshe Somli Mom Yikei Sheva Shonim B'Moed Shnas Hashmita B'Chag HaSukkos B'Bo Kol Yisrael Liros Es Pnei Hashem Elokecha B'Vakav Sheyivchar. So we're talking about the mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel, and now it's the regel of Sukkos. Tikras HaTorah Zos Neged Kol Yisrael Baznei. So we read the Torah, and HaTorah Zos Chazal going to say a certain parashas in Sefer Dvarim. And the Torah says that the Tikra, like it has to be read, but Chazal are going to try to dash Sukkim that it's the Melech who has to read the Torah. And by the way, the Melech has a status of kavod that's even greater than that of a Kohen Gadol. Again, I don't want to get off the tangent. That's a sugya to itself. And then the pasuk says, Hakhel es ha'av anoshim v'anoshim v'hata. So let's make a note of this. We'll come back to this a little bit later, that it doesn't say in the Torah who is responsible for Hakhel. It just says Hakhel es ha'av. Like some anonymous person has to gather together the people. And maybe it's the Melech himself who has to gather together the people. And what's the ultimate goal and purpose of this Hakhel, this public reading of the Sefer Torah once in 7 years? Etc., etc. So this is the mitzvah of Hakhel. Anoshim, noshim, v'tah. The Gemara in Chagiga is going to go through each one of these three categories and what the nature of their mitzvah is. Now, one of the issues that we're going to have here is whether or not the mitzvah is chal on the tzibur as a tzibur, which means that insofar as anoshim betaf make up, they comprise an entity called a tzibur, then there's a mitzvah of Hakhel. And the kiyum is that the Torah be read by the tzibur. Again, who's going to represent the tzibur to lahotzi et hadar b'fal? That's going to be who? The melech. But it's really a melech as an agent on behalf of the entire tzibur. And the Rama writes, mitzvah say, this is Chagiga Per Gimel, La Hakhel Kol Yisrael. It sounds like Kol Yisrael. I mean, the Mefarshim always understand the Rama when he says Kol Yisrael as referring to a chova on the tzibur. And Likros Bazneim min HaTorah. Now, let's emphasize the Rama chooses the word Be'ozneim. And that might sound like a secondary diuk, but it might be very important that the Ozneim is critical, because if we go back to the parsha that we just read, it says Laman Yishmahu, and Shmi, of course, is through the Oznayim. So there's an emphasis here on Shmi.
But also it says Ozneim in the first lesson.
Correct. So now I want to show you something in the pages that I did give out to you. I'm hoping that on the back of the second page, it should say Kuf Nun Tes on the bottom. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, how do you like that? I got lucky. Now, this is part of a tshuva trush, a yahrzeit trush that the Rav gave zillions of years ago on Gimel Shvat. And we'll see other parts of this shir in Ritz Hashem, but that's in your phone. But this is the interesting hakdom. Why? Because the Rav is talking about the mitzvah of Krias HaTorah. And he quotes a pasuk at the end of Parshas Mishpatim. You'll see that in a paragraph that starts Hine on the third line. And it says there in the parsha in Mishpatim, Shmos Chavkat, Vayikach Sefer Bris, Vayikra Bi-Oznei Ha'am. Again, a second time, an emphasis on Oznei Ha'am, which we define as what? Shmir. So if you fast forward, he says, Hakotzav Hidgish et Shmias HaKol. In other words, the Rav is being medayek from the pasuk of Vayikra Bi-Oznei Ha'am, that there's an emphasis here on Shmir. U'ulas HaKriya Be'oznayim. And here the Rav says, do you see the next 5 words? Below halimut. So the Rav is being machalik between 2 words, 2 terms, or 2 concepts. One is shmiyah, and the other is limud. What's the difference? Limud is nitvas, not just in the oznayim, but also in what? In the lave and the mark. Now, you and I may think that this is trush. You know, the Rav is like giving a hashkafa shir, but it's not. It's pure Allah. Why? Again, I'm fast forwarding for the lack of time. He says, "He kriya b'torah shebestav." Please underline the word shebestav. Mahavad mitzvah b'fnei atzma. And what is the kiyum of kriya in Torah shebestav? It's a kiyum of shmir, that we should hear the words of the Torah. And the Rav says that the source, or the, shall we say, the origin of this concept of shmir is mitzvahs Hakhel. The mitzvahs Hakhel on a motive, the HaTorah tzivsa likros es HaTorah b'fnei kol ha'ed noshim v'taf v'kerim. They're all included in the chi of mitzvahs Hakhel. So again, the Rav is not questioning whether the mitzvah is on the individual or on the tzibur, but he says that amongst the people who are there, I mean, if you have any question about it, right? So I created an institution called the MMY, right? So they're the women who understand the Torah. That was a little bit of a joke, but nobody laughed. But anyway, but then it's about the Taf. Okay, Taf means all young infants. They don't understand the Torah. Says Rav Soloveitchik, what is the nature of the mitzvah of Hakhel? It's shmir. It's letochas nayim. Afal pisha enam avinim shum dama. And the Gemara in Chagiga says that Anoshim could be, they're capable of what? Of limud, and maybe that would be a chobas yachid. We'll get back to that later. But Noshim, that's part of it. Tzibur of bos l'shma. So instead of limud, it's what? It's shmir. The tach b'chlal is another gather altogether. But if you look in the Rambam writes, "V'gerim she'enam akirim chayovim lahachin libon." He says, "What do you?" Here's a mature person, but he's a ger, and he doesn't really understand the Torah. Maybe they did for him Google Translate. So his vernacular was Italian, or we have gerim who come to help us in our house. They're not your gerim, but they're Brazilians. So when we communicate with them to tell them to help us clean the floor, we have to do it through Google Translate. So we write it in English and they see it in Brazilian, in Portuguese.
And the floor gets clean.
That's very good. In fact, they were there last night. I don't know if you saw them. And anyway, right? So he says that these gerim einam akirim, they don't understand what you're reading. There's no Google Translate, so it wasn't in Portuguese. But chayovim lahachin libam lahakshiv oznam. Again, this is the Rambam's language. It sounds like he's giving a mussar shmooze. But as we said before, the Torah itself tells us what the purpose and the agenda of Hakhel is. Lahachin lahakshiv liban the oznam lishmoa the ema ubiyira kiyom nisinasa b'sinai. So you see, says Rav Soloveitchik, yesh kiyum miyuchad shel Talmud Torah, b'artzos divrei Torah shebechsav. Again, we have to emphasize that. Af b'kriya nutelas havana. Somehow the hearing of the Torah, again, this is metaphysics, but it penetrates into the heart and has an impact on the soul. And that's just shmir without any limud, without any understanding Havana or HaTorah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. I just want to read one more line, if you don't mind. If you fast forward, however, he says in Kachas b'yachas l'Torah shebal peh leka kiyum dekriya klal uklal. What is the mitzvah of Torah shebal peh? Mitzvahs limud nemra b'Torah shebal peh. So what does limud mean? Havana. Go ahead, sweet.
Something, but I completely don't understand. If we go back to the original parsha,
Well, if you talk about Torah shebetzav, I don't care if you understand.
but that's the point here. No, the pasuk says, "Dikrat HaTorah zot neged b'ozneim, akelet anashim nashim b'atav gecha shebefecha leman yishma'u." Agreed. And then it says, "Uleman yoledu." V'yaru et Hashem Elokechem v'shamru la'asot et kol divrei HaTorah hazot.
The word libud here is not classic libud. It doesn't mean libud in the sense of havana. Libud means when I learn how to change my entire soul. It's a transformation of personality.
Or like the Gemara says, the anashim come
Or
lilmod,
referring to
the
Hashem,
nashim come
right?
lishmoa.
And then we have to the-
But the pasuk it says belam. The pasuk says belamdu. There's a meaning to belam.
Yeah, but what is the word after love?
V'yiras Hashem Elokechem. That's from the
not
learning.
If you're not learning mitzvahs. You're learning to do yira. It's experiential learning. It's not you're learning halachas.
I'm not going to waste time.
Okay, no, but again, what I think Tzvi is right. I think here what's critical for us is to understand that there is meaning to Torah Shebechsav through Shmiyah. Like, for example, when I was raised, we had a phrase in Yiddish that said a Tillim Zoger. There were people who would stay in the shul for an hour and read Tillim.
Even though
Honestly, they had fashtei nitken vart. They didn't know one word. And I used to laugh about it. And then on the other hand, you have a person who reads a Mishnah and a state nitken vart. So in the case of Tillim, it's part of Torah Shebechsav. According to the Rav, it's going to somehow have an impact on his personality, and it's a kiyum of Shmias Tvarim Shebechsav. But in the case of a Mishnah, with all due respect, if you read a Mishnah 50 times, like a Tuki, and you don't understand the word of the Mishnah, is very garnished. Again, now, if you were a Hasidic Yid, you would get very upset about this.
You're getting me upset now. Also.
Well, maybe you have some Hasidus in you. I don't know. But as a Litvak, this is what the Rav is saying. A Mishnah is Torah Shebal Peh. Either you understand it or you don't understand it. Now, this is going to have an impact on Krias HaTorah. So now I want you to open up your phones, and I hope you got it in the phone. So the page that I gave you in the phone should say Kuf Samach Dalet on the bottom if that came out.
This goes back to the first mission of the parak. There clearly are certain things that need to be understood. And that's this entire parak. There's certain things that there is a certain value in saying the words of Torah, even though you don't understand them at all.
Right, but that might only be in Lashon Kodesh, you're saying. Is that what you mean?
Things that need to be in Lashon Kodesh.
No, but I'm saying
need to be said that way, regardless whether you
maybe you
understand
could
it or
say
not.
right, exactly that because it's a chumrah and it's a kula. Why? Because it's a chumrah that you could only be yotzi in Lashon Kodesh, but it's a kula that you might not understand a single word.
Correct.
And there's meaning in the words itself. So Daniel's really raising a fundamental question. What would be if I read the Torah publicly, right? Krias HaTorah, let's say on Sheni Chamishi or Shabbos, and I read it in a different language.
Right.
And I didn't understand what I was reading. So that's why I wanted to show you here on Kuf Samach Daled, if you can find it. I hope the page numbers came out anyway.
It's
the first page.
Page number is missing on it.
Missing, okay.
It's in the middle of the notes.
Okay.
You're right.
What happened?
So the page number is there.
Is there?
It's there. It's just in the middle of the notes. So
We see it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Middle of my own notes. So
Yes.
my chicken scratch. Okay. So he says here, you see the paragraph that starts for Hu Adin L'Gabi Torah. So Rav Soloveitchik here is quoting a sugya in Bava Kama, and the Gemara Bava Kama establishes that the Nevi'im at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu established Krias HaTorah. And the Gemara derives it from a pasuk that says, "Vayelchu shloshes yamim bamidbar v'lo matzu mayim." And then the pasuk says, "Vayavo marasa," etc., etc. And "Vayilonu ha'amal Moshe." So the Gemara asks, what does it mean that they went 3 days without water? And the Gemara invokes a pasuk in Yeshaya, very famous pasuk, "Hoi kol tzomei l'chula mayim." And the mayim here is Torah. So Rav Soloveitchik asks the following question. They went 3 days without Torah, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu, or the Nevi'im at the time Moshe Rabbeinu, established Krias HaTorah. And Krias HaTorah is meant to be the antidote to this situation of leus. What's leus? Leus is a kind of a spiritual dryness. So they were dry because they went 3 days without Torah. So what did they establish? Krias HaTorah. Shkoyach. That's what they have here this minute. They have it also by you in Zayed, that the bar mitzvah boy at the end of each aliyah, they yell Shkoyach. It's fun the first time, but after a while it gets a little bit monotonous. Anyway, so
When you're 13, it never gets fun.
No.
Funny. It's always fun.
It must depend on the
In any
schools.
event,
We had a bar mitzvah here.
So what do you gain over here? They went
Right.
3 days without Torah. They were spiritually dry, and you read the Torah publicly without having a hefsek of 3 days. There was Monday, there was Thursday, there was Shabbos. Fine.
this was before Matan Torah, right?
Don't ask this.
Okay, that's a different question. Let me not get off too much on what's the joke? I don't.
But yes.
Okay.
But that's before Matan Torah.
Says the Rav. Listen to this.
They had that they got it tomorrow.
Yeah, before Matan Torah.
Anybody want to hear this?
Torah was there.
Okay, so you have to know sugya and gittin on daf samach about Megillah. Okay, fine. Ha'adam, do you see the second line in that paragraph? Ha'adam ha'meshul Torah together at summit. He's dry. Mashu chaserlo. Chaserlo means there's something missing spiritually. V'rotza lishtos, he wants to drink. Umargish et tsar hanefesh hamishtokekes. Okay, he's a nefesh hamishtokekes. He's passionately in need for Torah to quench his thirst, his spiritual thirst. Mama sapeko. So what's going to satisfy him? Kriya daya. What does he mean by kriya? Hell, anybody home?
Reading
Kriya without
Torah.
what?
Without
Without havana. We're going to read the Torah publicly. Why? Because through hearing the Torah, when the Torah and the cold Torah penetrates into his soul, and now Rabosai, we can begin to understand why Rav Soloveitchik builds so much on Hakhel. Because at the end, Lilmod Liras Hashem Elokecha, how? He's a ger who doesn't understand. The Rambam says, nevertheless, his ears are absorbing the kol of Torah. That's all the kol of Torah. Nothing's going through his mind. It's amazing, right? I never thought the ears were so important, but now I have a new appreciation for ears. I don't know. We say every morning, Pokech Ivrim. Maybe we should say Pokech Oznayim, because through hearing the Torah, it penetrates into his soul.
I think it's more than just. Krias HaTorah is not just hearing it, right? You're not Yotze Krias HaTorah if you don't have a Torah and if you don't have a minyan, if you know those things, right? It's Krias HaTorah is because it's the whole ritual of the tzibur, And
Well,
it's
here I
an
think
experiential
you're right. I
ritual.
think Yoni, here we should differentiate between Hakhel and Krias HaTorah, meaning all those requirements apply to the Takanas Chachamim or the Nevi'im of Krias HaTorah, but with regard to Hakhel, I don't know if we have any requirements.
Well,
it's just get together the kahal and shmir, and it goes into the
And not only that,
But
part of the Kriya was done Baal Peh. I think that proves what you said. Part of the Kriya of Hakhel.
I don't know. In Kohen Gadol,
That was the
Kohen Gadol. Yeah, that's Kohen. I don't know about Mel.
But I think we're looking at the wrong way. In other words, the essence of Hakhel isn't that once a year everybody
Once in 7 years.
once in 7 years everybody hears the Melech, that everybody hears the Torah Shabbat, the Torah Shabbat. The point is that once every 7 years everybody gets together for this big ceremony. There's no greater ritual than having all of Am Yisrael coming and having the king saying anything, right?
So that might depend, Yoni, on the next discussion that we want to have, which is here in the about whether Hakhel is a chovas yachid. Each person has to come, and that means his obligation is personal, or it's only the call, and it's not a personal obligation at all.
I mean, either way, Hakhel is by definition a communal ritual. Even if you have an obligation to join the communal ritual, I mean, it's a communal ritual,
Right?
And the same thing with
Krias HaTorah.
With Krias HaTorah is a communal ritual, regardless of who the chiyuv is on, but that it's more than just you hear it; it's you experience it
As part of a community, as part of
exactly.
Let's see.
I mean,
Okay.
I think that's very important, and then even forgetting sort of metaphysics, like the ger doesn't understand anything, the child doesn't understand anything, but they still could understand all of my community coming together to listen to this. This is important, right? How do you teach children what's important? That's how.
Gotcha. Good.
Sorry.
No. It's a whole. No, you're adding a whole nother dimension, which will connect what we're doing now with what we want to do in a few minutes.
That sounds like in the Rambam.
But Rabosai, if I could ask you a favor of you, I want to go through what I consider to be an amazing chiddush of Rav Soloveitchik, which is on the next page. And again, if you have the page numbers, you'll see Kuf Samach Ches, and then Kuf Samach Vav. Kuf Samach Hey, I'm sorry, and Kuf Samach Vav. Do you have those pages?
Yeah.
All right. Now, again, I am absolutely passionate about what we're about to learn, and I don't know how to transmit my passion. Honestly, in my mind, this is Rav Soloveitchik at his greatest. And I spent 5 years in the Shia. That's not enough. It says the following: the Gemara establishes, listen carefully, that there were two takanos in reading the Torah publicly. There was Moshe Rabbeinu, or the Nevi'im at the time, Moshe Rabbeinu, and then there was Ezra. And the difference, says the Gemara, is that as far as Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned, they called up one person and he read 3 psukim. Ezra instituted 3 olim, 3 korim, and 10 psukim. Again, you can rack your brains for a million years and try to figure this out. What did Ezra institute here that changed from Moshe Rabbeinu? Okay, this part's to be heard. Yeah. But I want to tie it into Hakhel. Sisra of salvation. There are two different kiyumim in Krias HaTorah B'tzibur, and the difference is between Moshe and Ezra. Moshe instituted Krias Torah Shebechsav, and in Krias Torah Shebechsav, it's enough, we'll see why, to have one person in 3 psukim. The shear of Kriya, to create an entity of Torah to be heard and to be absorbed through the ears into the lave, is 3 psukim. And we're going to see this over and over again. We'll see it in Musaf and Rosh Hashanah. We'll see it over and over again. You need 3 psukim. However, Ezra completely revolutionized the whole institution of Krias HaTorah. From Ezra's perspective, Krias HaTorah was Limud Torah, was Havanas HaTorah. It was not the focus exclusively on Torah Shebechsav, but Torah Shebechsav integrated with what? Torah Shebal Peh. And what's the greatest proof of that? Targum. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have Targum. Ezra had Targum. I think there's still some Yemenite communities that read with the Targum.
Only on Shabbos?
I think in NCSY they do a good job. They have, what do they call it? Parsha highlights. What is the kiyum of Targum? It's a kiyum of Torah Shebal Peh. Targum is meant to afford the listener with an understanding of what he's listening. Again, you might ask, well, who speaks Aramaic? But at that time, the vernacular was Aramaic. Says the Rav, the shear of Lim is 10 psukim, not 3 psukim. And now, once you introduce Torah Shebal Peh, you're going to have representatives of all parts of the Tzibur, as the Rav is going to explain. You need a Kohen, you need a Levi, you need Yisrael, we need 3. And therefore, the Kriya of Ezra, post-Ezra, has a different purpose and a different goal. It's essentially a limit of Torah Sheba Bal Peh. And I thought, again, let's just read a few lines in the Rav, so you see I'm not fooling you here. He says the following. Takanat Moshe, you have it on page Kuf Samachet. Torah Shebechsav. And he says that Torah Shebechsav is Mekadeshes into Adam, meaning when the cold Torah enters in through the ears and penetrates to his soul, it sanctifies, it uplifts the person. Krias Yud is stopping over Shlosh Krias Shapasuk Echad, over Kriyakas Shlosh Pasukim. The nearer to Yesh Chiluk Yisod of Shir Yud, L'Shir Pasuk O Gimel, Pasuk O Shloshem Shiburim, the Kriya of Abira is Kitvei HaKodesh. And you can create that entity of a Kriya of Kitvei HaKodesh. However, with regard to Torah Shebal Peh, he says, there the sheer Kriya for Havana purposes is Asar Psukim, which you'll see he develops here on page Kuf Samach Vav. Shir Zed Nikba, B'mizgeres Takonas Ezra, Shechdisa Yisod Chodesh, B'yachas Krias HaTorah. Ezra Biseis Krias HaTorah, Al-Chiv Krias Torah Shebechsav HaMakadeshes, V'Torah Shebal Peh. HaMakasheres V'Mitzkasheres L'Torah Shebal Peh. V'Yonokorim U'Mefarshim Kisvei HaKodesh. That's the Targum that's meant to interpret the Torah. And therefore, you introduce the new shir in Krias HaTorah, namely Asar Psukim, Hamavim Shir B'Yonei HaTorah. So let me ask you a question, Rabbi Osai. I'm just anticipating the end of this paragraph. Supposing I have a parsha in the Torah that is a complete parsha, it's a what we call in modern Hebrew Yechidat Havana, Yechidat Limud. It's an entity, but it only has 9 psukim. Fine. And that's why we read at the end of Shalach, the Parsha of Amalek, it only has 9 psukim. That's the Gemara Megillah. Take a look over there. Anyway, it goes on and on. I mean, we just covered 2 pages out of out of a 20-page essay. But I thought that maybe in the light of Rav Soloveitchik's Chiddush, we could perhaps add a new level of understanding to the question of whether the mitzvah of Krias HaTorah is on the tzibur or on the yochid. So these are the pages I think I photocopied for you.
In the midst of Hakhel.
And then we'll go back to Hakhel. Yeah, I don't know whether to start with Hakhel and end with.
I guess
Yeah.
my question is then a question, which is there's a separate and distinct mitzvah of Krias HaTorah, separate and distinct from Hakhel?
Yes, Hakhel is Doraisa, and Krias HaTorah is Holy D'Rabbanan. Hakhel is once in every 7 years, almost 8 years, right? It's 7 going to 8. Whereas Krias HaTorah is 3 times a week, actually 4 times a week. Do you have these pages? That's what I want to know. Do you have a page that says on it Nun Aleph? And Tzvi, we didn't do this.
No. Yeah.
I just want to clear the area. He says Din Sibur. That's why I wanted to separate the two.
No, I'm saying, but there's 2 copies left of one of them, but not of the other one.
Oh, I don't know. I tried to make
We're good. We can check.
5 copies. That's what I tried to make. Somehow I had Nevuah that there would be 5 people. All right. Din Tzibur b'Kriyas HaTorah. Now there's a Mishnah on Daf Chav Gimel and Masechet Megillah that lists all those dvarim shetzrichim lehem asara. Correct? And on that list is Ein Korin B'Torah Pachos Me'asara. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So now the Ran quotes the Ramban, Shelo nimnu b'Mishnah el dvarim shein chovas sibur, shein osam elen kein asara, o ruban, mechuyavim v'davar, kigon shelo shamu kaddish u'barchu. Well, I don't know why he doesn't add kedusha here. All right, fine. So you have here something called dvarim sheb'kedusha, and that's a chova that's incumbent upon the tzibur. And we must have a tzibur in order to generate the chova. So the chova emerges from the existence of a tzibur. And he says, nafkamina, you see the 3rd paragraph, be'ofen sheyesh yachid shelo shama, ha'im efshal likros avura. Let's get together another 9 people who already heard the Kriyas HaTorah in order to facilitate the Kriya on behalf of that one person who missed Kriyas HaTorah. And he quotes the Chayei Adam, who says that Achiyuv hu lekol echad sheyishma Kriyas HaTorah. But he says that kol takonas habracha is bishum kavod hatzibur. So the Chayei Adam comes up with like a compromise shita. Yes, the yachid is obligated in kriya, but we're going to leave out the bracha because the bracha is for the kavod hatzibur. However, the Ran quotes the Ramban. That's very interesting. When we're on page Nun Aleph in the photocopy that I made for you. You have it?
Yeah.
So we'll look at a paragraph that starts Ure'ei b'Chayei Adam. You have it? All right. So now it's interesting. How do we know that, according to one shita at least, not the Chayei Adam shita, that the mitzvah and the chova and the takon of Kriyas HaTorah is on the tzibur? We know it from the Ran in the name of whom? Hello? The first paragraph, the Ran in the name of the Ramban. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Good. Why do I point this out to you? Because it's very strange. You know, we're quoting a Ran in the name of the Ramban. I mean, why not quote the Ramban himself? We don't have the Ramban. So here I want to tell you a little story. You like a story? Okay, but in order to appreciate this story, you have to know that in Brisk, there's something called a Mesorah. Mesorah means that you have to say it over exactly the way you heard it. That's where there was a machlokes between Baruch Ber and the Brisker Rav. Brisker Rav always accused Baruch Ber, changed it a little when he said it over. Although they say about Baruch Ber that he used to pick up, when he said the Shir of Baruch Ber in comments, he would lift up his pants exactly where Reb Chaim lifted up his pants when Reb Chaim said the Shir. Anyway, the Rav said that Reb Chaim, when he was traveling from Brisk to Bialystok by train, apparently it was either a Monday or a Thursday. He got off the train midway, which is a big hassle, in order to hear Krias HaTorah. So what did Reb Chaim understand? Is Krias HaTorah a chiyuv that emerges when they have a tzibur, or is it incumbent on the yachid? On the yachid. And Reb Chaim took this so seriously, like a true blue brisker, that he would get off the train in order to hear Krias HaTorah. And Rav Soloveitchik, what?
Rav Soloveitchik always had a minyan mincha time, so you could hear Lane.
Okay. So I didn't know about Rabbi, but I can tell you about my Rebbe that after the shir, when he came in on a Monday or Thursday, he would gather together 9 people for Krias HaTorah. It was a chovas yachid. But the Rav added, the Ramban holds that it's a chovas tzibur, but we don't know where the Ramban is. So my friend, I mean, he's a little bit older than me by about a decade, Rav Yossi Blau, found the Ramban. The Ramban is tucked away in the Milchamas Hashem at the end of Masechet Megillah. I can show it to you inside. But Rabbi Blau was so nervous about saying to the Rav, we have the Ramban, he couldn't get the words out of his mouth. So he opened up the Milchamas Hashem of the Ramban, put it on the table in front of the Rav. The Rav closed the book and said, we don't know where the Ramban is. It's part of the Masorah that we don't know where the Ramban is. In any event, here we have a fundamental machlokas as to whether or not the chiyuv of Krias HaTorah is on the yachid or the tzibur. So he says, nafkamina, number one, you have a person who didn't hear Krias HaTorah. Can we gather together 9 other people? And number 2, do you have to get off the train in order to hear Krias HaTorah?
But those are almost two. In the first scenario, it's possible that you're not even allowed to gather 9 other people who already heard.
Correct. If you hold the chovas tzibur, then you don't have a tzibur because no one's chayim.
No, it could be a chovas tzibur. You can create it every time you have a tzibur. Just because you're yotzi doesn't mean you can't create that chiyuv over again.
No, usually when you have a chovas tzibur, it means you have a tzibur of people to whom that mitzvah is shayach. It's relevant to them. But if they already heard Krias HaTorah, then it would not be permissible to read the Torah. Again, the Chayei Adam has this pshara. Says, all right, we'll read the Torah for the yachid, but we'll leave out the brachos. But apparently, the Chayei Adam also understood that the yachid has to hear Torah, and we're gonna organize a kriya on his behalf, but we're gonna leave out the brachos. And that's what the Rav did.
They laid and they did not, and they didn't.
They just laid it through.
Okay.
Rav Lichtenstein even felt that it wasn't just that you needed it, but you needed to get every single parsha.
Right.
There was one year we were there for Pesach. And we came back.
It's so much more complicated when you miss the Seder HaParshas. Or if you're in Chutz La'aretz, so they read 2 parshas, and here they read 1.
Achrei Mos Kedoshim. No, it was Tazria Mitzorah, and then the first aliyah of Achrei Mos Kedoshim was all that first aliyah. We had a separate minyan in the other room. We had
it was the longest aliyah in history.
So I remember with all the whole COVID sugya is a whole big thing with not doing.
What, they read it all together?
Our Balkora and the Shar Eliyahu.
This is what he had to say.
The first time we made him a Petzit Minyan, and so people are up and down the street, you could hear from 100 yards away.
He laid all the parshas that were missed.
So the first aliyah he laid, what do we heard Kititza, but not Vayakel Pekude. Who remembers? Whatever, but he laid like 3 parshiot and then an aliyah, and then he had 6 more aliyah.
Yeah, that was a good. I remember doing that at the Shavuos second day, something with that, and at Shabbos Mincha, laid all of Bamidbar, and at Shabbos Mincha all of Bamidbar, and that's the first aliyah of Nessa.
So on both sides, I want to. What I want to do now. How do we have a little more time? Where are we holding? I'm totally oblivious. Okay, we have a little time.
Yeah.
So listen, Rabosai, I want to see if the opening statement that I made today, that Hakhel is like the background for what we call Talmud Torah the Rabbin, and many of the halachas can be derived from Hakhel, as we saw the Rav Soloveitchik quotes Hakhel to justify the Krias HaTorah without Havana. You remember that? That it's just Shmiya, Netula, Havana. I want to see if we can move forward with that and add another dimension. So for that, I'd like you to look on page Nun, which again, I don't know if I photocopied page Nun,
Yeah,
I did. Oh, great. Now, you may even have Mempes, the last paragraph on Mempes, you might have.
Yeah.
You see what it says, Geter Achiyu b'Kriyas HaTorah? So he
Yeah.
quotes Rav Yosef Engel. Chokar b'Geter mitzvahs Kriyas HaTorah. Im chovasa shekol echad me'atzibur yikra b'piv. Okay, that's why I call it chovas kriya. No, if it's a chiyuv a kriya b'piv, then l'chora, where's your kriya? There's only one kriya of the shliach tzibur, and even if the ola is the shliach tzibur, but he's the only one who's reading it, so he says shomea ka'on. Oh, what's the second side? She'en lem klal chiyuv kriya v'chol chiyuvam hu shmiya bilvad. Now, what do you mean shmiya bilvad? Where do you come off telling me that Krias HaTorah, which is called kriya, is a chiyuv shmiya? I mean, that's like you're pulling the wool over my eye. So what does he add? To Moshe Matzinu. This is Rav Yosef Engel, 150 years ago, right? To Moshe Matzinu b'mitzvahs Hakhel. Shachiyuv hu lishma es divrei HaTorah. And then he quotes the Sefer Chinuch, who goes into a whole elaboration. Now, Rabbosai, if you are going to tell me that Krias HaTorah is derived from Hakhel, and it's a mitzvah of Shmiya, then what am I going to tell you about the women folk? They have to hear Krias HaTorah. Is that the craziest thing in the world? In other words, again, what I'm saying is that if your paradigm is Hakhel, and Chaim, you remember that we said that Hakhel is Doraisa. Now the Rabbanan are making takana, and that takana is going to fit the pattern called the tikkun of the Doraisa of Hakhel. And we're saying that the mitzvah of Hakhel is Shmiya, not Kriya. We don't need Shomei Kona. Well, wait a second. If the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah, like it's Av, it's a Tolda, is a mitzvah Shmiya, then guess what? The women should also be coming to hear the Torah. So you'll tell me, Rabbi Berzon, you became a left-winger, right? You became very progressive. Maybe we should have Krias HaTorah, right, for the women. But take a look at the Magen Avram on page Nun. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs down. Does everybody know about this Magen Avram? HaMagen Avram Kasav Siman Reish Pei Vav Sheisha Chayeves Lishmoa Krias HaTorah. Now I don't know who's reading the Torah. I think it's a man who's reading the Torah because he could create a Kriya. She's not included in the mitzvah of Kriya, but if the mitzvah is Shmiya, she has to come to hear the Torah. V'afal pisha nitkena mishum Talmud Torah v'noshim einam mechuyos v'Talmud Torah v'shinat v'lech v'lovasecha v'kol makom mitzvah lishmoa kimo mitzvahs Hakhel. Whoa. Now, both sides, this to me is mind-boggling. That the equation, we'll call it the tzad hashava between Hakhel and Kriyas HaTorah, ad kedei kach, that the Magen Avram says that the mitzvah is Shmiya, and if the mitzvah is Shmiya and not Kriya, then women are included in the chi of Shmiya, just like they're included in the mitzvah of Hakhel, which is the mitzvah of Shmiya. What does that remind you of, Rabbosai? The Bahag in Krias Megillah, what does the Bahag say? That a man is obligated in Kriya and a woman is obligated in Shmiya. I mean, things are beginning to take form over here. And now what I'd like to show you is perhaps another equation between Hakhel and Krias HaTorah, and that is on page Nun Zayin, which I think is in your phone. Just 1 second. No, I'm sorry. Page Nun Vav, which is the first page that I gave you in your phone. Harishonim nechleku, you have it? Al mimu telas mitzvah zu. Im al klal hatzibur. Al yidei bezdin. So now we go back to the issue. Remember I asked you before, the Torah says, Hakhel es ha'am. Who is the Torah addressing? Who is responsible to gather together the people? So we have a rule of thumb that whenever there's a chiyuv on the tzibur, the classic case, the paradigmic case would be Kiddush HaChodesh. Who actually implements the chiyuv hatzibur? Who represents the tzibur? Bezdin. La Hakhel is kol adas Yisrael. So Rabosai, do I have to show up at Hakhel? Am I actively involved in fulfilling an obligation to join Hakhel? So far, no. Why? Because according to this view of the Rishonim, when the Torah says Hakhel, it's addressing the entire tzibur represented by the Bezdin. But Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, or for that matter, Leah, Rachel, and Zilpah, they're not obligated to show up. Who's going to beat them up, so to speak, and force them to come? Who's going to supervise that the entire tzibur assembles together? That's Bezdin on a Chovas tzibur. Oh, what's the other sheet in the Rishonim? I'll call echad minat tzibur lehi kohel. Well, I would change the vowels here to lehi kohel. You have to go and, so to speak, gravitational pull. You have to get there for the Hakhel in the Azorah. And the Rambam writes, "Ha mitzvah hi lahakhel es kol Yisrael." What does that sound like? Lahakhel. The Rambam doesn't say that kol yochid v'yochid chayav lihi kohel, but rather lahakhel. Ha mitzvah mashmash ha mitzvah zumu tells al klal hatzibur lahakhel es kol Yisrael.
Maybe that's not individual responsibility for themselves, but every individual is responsible for everyone being
Correct, but it's not a direct individual obligation. Meaning, if I decide that on that day of Hakhel, I'm going on a tiyul, I have not in any direct fashion violated my chiyuv, because the chiyuv is on the tzibur, and the tzibur is assembled. And who has to assemble the tzibur? The tzibur has to assemble itself. And who as an entity will represent the tzibur as an entity? That's going to be Bezdin. That doesn't mean that I have violated my obligation. But if on the other end we say that it's called echad minat tzibur lihi kohel, then I have to show up. If I don't show up at Hakhel, and the same thing should apply perhaps to Krias HaTorah. In the light of our assumption, which again is my theory here, that we have to pattern Krias HaTorah as the Takana D'Rabbanan after Hakhel, then these two shittas of Rishonim will really impact on the question about Krias HaTorah. Is Krias HaTorah an obligation that emerges when the tzibur is a tzibur? You have an existing tzibur. The tzibur now is an obligation to read the Torah. Or no, every individual has to get off the train between Brisk and Bialystok in order to hear Krias HaTorah, because the Chovas Yochid. So that the same lack of clarity and, well, we could call it ambiguity about the nature of the mitzvah of Hakhel, which the Machlokas Rishonim, would have a spin-off in terms of Krias HaTorah, if we assume that Krias HaTorah is established as a pattern of Hakhel. But wait a second, Rabosai. Shouldn't that depend upon Moshe versus Ezra? Meaning that as far as Takonis Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned, there we have an equation with Hakhel. And those who don't have an ability to understand, nevertheless, there's a mitzvah of what's the word? Lishma ba'oznov, whatever the word is there, right? Lashmiya la'oznov. Why? Because, as the Rav says, they went 3 days without Torah, Nilu, they were in a state of spiritual exhaustion and they were dried up. They need to hear Torah, and Torah is Mekadeshes es Adam, just simply hearing the words of Torah Shebach. But from Ezra's perspective, now we have a whole new dimension and a new variable that we're throwing into the equation, and that is Havanas HaTorah. That already comes under the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So I'm wondering if perhaps Krias HaTorah has two dimensions to it. Number one, it's a Chovas Tzibur, Dum Yodeh Hakhel, and there it's a mitzvah of Shmiya. And from that perspective, the Magen Avram would obligate even women to come and hear Krias HaTorah. Would they have to listen to the Mitargem? No. That obligation to listen to the Mitargem, which is a reflection of whose takana? Of Ezra's takana, which introduces a whole new element of what? Of Havanas Torah Sheba'al Peh. Here the women could stay home. They can't stay home, according to Magen Avram, because of the Hakhel element. But they can stay home as far as the Torah Sheba'al Peh Havana element, because that comes under Talmud Torah.
And that's why they could be one aliyah, but they can't be all of the aliyahs, because the one aliyah is the Shmiya, but all the aliyahs is the Talmud Torah.
Correct. Excellent. right? Because according to Moshe Rabbeinu's Takana, all you need is one aliyah. If this be the case, then maybe Rabbosai, the issue of tzibur versus yachid in Krias HaTorah really boils down to the issue of Torah shebechsav as opposed to Torah shebal peh, meaning that if we're talking about Torah shebechsav, then we can introduce the chovas tzibur and the shmiyah of Torah shebechsav, as you said very well, Yoni, as a communal experience, and that could include the women, but I don't have to get off the train. But if, on the other hand, we enhance the takana of Krias HaTorah in the way that Ezra wanted us to do so, and it's no longer dumya da Hakhel, because it's not a communal experience, it's a Talmud Torah obligation, which is mutelas ala yachid, then we don't have the Magen Avraham. And now we could say that I have to get off the train. That's what I wanted to suggest. So what I've tried to accomplish here is to integrate three different essays into one presentation. First, the essay of Rav Soloveitchik in the Yartzeit Drosha. Secondly, an essay in the Otzar Union on Takanas Krias HaTorah, together with the essay
On Hakhel.
on Hakhel. That's what I tried to
So
do.
when you try to do
Ad
one,
kan.
when you try to do one essay, you can't get it done in time. When you do three, then you can get it done in time.
Well, that's because three together is an Indian of Havana. One is just simply hearing it.
Very good. Anyway,
Why,
So
why did you say earlier that there's no Indian of bracha? The bracha was just minyan kivodat tzibur.
well, let's try to think about that. The
It's
Chayyim wants.
mitzvahs, isn't it?
Oh, so you're right. From the perspective of Hakhel, I can understand the Chayyim, that these are separate brachas, meaning I already recited my personal bracha this morning, right? And now I'm reciting another bracha on Krias HaTorah or on Hakhel. Says the Chayyim, that already introduces an element beyond Talmud Torah, and that's the element of Hakhel. But if you're getting off the train, or we're organizing a minyan for you as a yachid, that's already pure Talmud Torah. If it's pure Talmud Torah, you don't say the Birchas HaTorah. Why repeat a second round of Birchas HaTorah?
But why
The
wouldn't there be
new
a
Birch.
why
Yeah.
wouldn't there be a birchas mitzvah on Hakhel?
It wouldn't be the same bracha, because the bracha is for Talmud Torah.
Oh, you're asking in general. Well, no. Tzvi is asking a very fundamental question. Why don't we say Asher Kitshanu Mitzvos V'Tzivanu Al Mitzvos Hakhel? Now,
Do
if
we know we don't? If there's real Hakhel, this
I'm
is
pretty sure we don't. I'm pretty sure we don't. Meaning Kishibane Hamikdash, and we'll restore the mitzvah of Hakhel. I don't think there'll be a Birchas HaMitzvah. I'll tell you why. Again, this is an hour shir, but we never establish a Birchas HaMitzvah on a mitzvah of bracha. Meaning, we have the following mitzvahs of bracha. One is Krias HaTorah. There's no Birchas HaTorah in Krias HaTorah. I'm sorry, I meant to say Talmud Torah. Number two, we have a Birchas a mitzvah, which is essentially a bracha in Birkas HaMazon, and there's no Birkas HaMitzvah, Birkas HaMazon. And number three, many Rishonim will say that there's no bracha on Haggadah, on Sipri Tzis Mitzrayim, because the entire structure of Sipri Tzis Mitzrayim is formulated in brachos. There are 4 brachos, and they form the backbone of Sipri Tzis Mitzrayim. In fact, we drink 4 kosos over those 4 brachos. And again, it's what?
16 percent.
I didn't hear you. What?
He says so 16, 4 cups for each of the cups. So 16 cups.
Four.
Oh, that's what I said. I meant to say a bracha for each of the 4 kosos,
That's an interesting.
and that's part of the
The 60
Sipri
cups,
Tzis
that's what we
Mitzrayim.
said.
And therefore, we don't make a bracha on a bracha.
This goes back to Gemara of Yomi 2 days ago when they asked Rabbi, when they asked who is it, and they asked Elazar ben Shamuel, the Maharach Yamim. He said that I never did Birkas Kohen without a bracha, and that's
So what's
the fact that we make a bracha and Birkas Kohen breaks all these rules that you just mentioned.
Because the essence of the mitzvah is a bracha.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you'll find that here. I'd like to show it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, but now why don't we make a bracha on a bracha?
a kiddush.
So I'll tell you why. I think. Have you ever heard of Rab David Pardo? Have you ever learned his Sfarim? Have you ever learned Tanakh with Mitzudas David?
I know great grandson.
Have you ever learned the Tosefta with the Chazdei David? And it goes on and on. The man wrote, his name was Reb David Pardo. He lived in Italy about 5 centuries ago. I happen to be the proud owner of a number of his Sfarim. I mean, the original, the first editions. And Reb David Pardo was a prolific writer. He wrote Mizmor David. He wrote a Sefer on Yoredea. Every one of his Sfarim ends with the word David because his name was David. And by the way, the yeshiva that he learned in, for those of you who may have learned in YU, I don't know if we have any. Time you learned in YU, Daniel, did you learn YU? Okay, so maybe you remember the emblem for YU? It says Torah Umada. So that was the name of the yeshiva that Reb David Pardo was in charge of. So Torah Umada was not an invention of YU. Okay. But anyway, so in the Tosefta, so Reb Chaim, I was waiting for the lights to go out to tell me we have to end, right? I got the hint. So Reb David Pardo, in his Chazdei David, he says that there's an equation between Birchas HaMitzvah and Birchas HaNenim. You hear this?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the difference between the two? There's only a minor difference.
You want to keep them separate?
You can put one on top of the other, as long as it's in order, that's good. See, here are both sides. What's the difference between Birchas HaNenim and Birchas HaMitzvah? And he says the following. Each one is a pigeon. One is a pigeon on Hegdesh, which is called Kedushas Damim. That's a basic level of Kedusha. And one is a pigeon on Kedushas Haguf. And he says that being nene from this world without a bracha means that you violate the Hegdesh on the basic level of Kedushas Berek Habayis, Kedushas Damim. But if you would if you would fulfill a mitzvah, which is Kodesh Kadoshim, without a bracha, then without that pigeon, he says, you are being nene from Kodshei Kodshim, which is much heavier and more profound me'ilah. So I thought, and I'm not sure if it was my idea or I learned this with Reb Chaim Milson. I don't remember if he said it or I said it, because, we learned Chavrusa together 10 hours a week for a long period of time, for years. And if you have a mitzvah that is a bracha, the essence of the mitzvah is a bracha, like the examples we gave, then it doesn't need a pigeon, because the pigeon is built into the mitzvah itself. Every other mitzvah, you don't make a bracha, so you need a bracha to be part of the kodshei kodshim. But if it's inherently a mitzvah, that's what the inherently a bracha, that's what the mitzvah is, then it doesn't need a pigeon. It has a built-in pigeon in the mitzvah itself. All right.
Birchas mitzvah is a matter also like Birchas HaNenim.
Exactly. I mean, that I heard from the Rav, but he didn't know about the Chazdei David. The Rambam in Hilchos Brachos.
I was in yeshiva with David Pardo, like a great grandson.
Serious?
I think so.
Oh man, I got to